First off, obviously, good morning to everyone. Thank you all for joining. We really appreciate you taking the time out of your schedules to hop on with us and learn a little bit more about potentially what VIP has to offer. Maybe you're familiar with this functionality. Maybe you're using this functionality today, and that's fantastic, something that we always love to see. But of course, we always want to take the opportunity to make sure we're all on a level playing field, that we all understand where we can get the most out of the application. When are the right times? Maybe sometimes when are the not so right times to use some of our functionalities. And for that reason, we will be going through, of course, focusing today on the batch invoice submission and handling process. As we get started, we will focus on current state, of course. We're going to go through, we're going to talk about some real life examples of when that functionality can be used to very efficient ends. And sometime in the conversation, we'll also be talking about potentially some of the future state of the functionality as a whole. So one of the things that we all at VIP implore you all to do is ask questions, whether it's in chat or with your mic. Just make sure you're asking questions. Make sure that there's nothing left for you to understand. Really, our goal here is just to make sure that we leave you knowing as much about the application, hopefully, as we do over here at VIP. So that being said, we all can see my screen. That's great. I have got confirmation of that. And from here, we are going to be spending the portion of our conversation in the Envision application, which is more so geared towards the vendor operation. Some of you may be leveraging the BAP application, and you will know very, very similar views as we go through this. So without further ado, I am going to go ahead and log in, and we can go ahead and get started. So I'm logged in here. I'm working for Next Claim Services, small IA firm or independent adjuster firm over here in St. Petersburg, Florida. In the middle here, as we always log in to our application on the dashboard, we're going to see invoices that we've already submitted here in the middle. Now, as we click on those invoices, we get to learn a little bit more about what actually comprises that invoice, the invoice total, the estimate amount, all of that basic claim information that we're familiar with before we create an invoice. So from here, the way that we'll start the batch functionality process is actually just to go over to the batch functionality tab over here on the left-hand menu and click the drop-down. And for us vendor managers, we have two options. We have the option to upload a batch invoice, and we also have the ability to manage the batch invoices that we've already submitted. I should note that while we're going through this, we're going to be talking about batches in 2 to 3 invoices at most. That's not to say that our functionality is limited to those 2 or 3 invoices. Of course, if you're submitting hundreds of invoices at a time, that's perfectly acceptable, but for the purposes of the conversation and just to keep it as simple and straightforward as possible, we will be limiting that to just 2 or 3. So by clicking on the Upload Batch Invoice tab, we'll be taken to an interface that, well, allows us to submit a batch. But before we do that, we actually have to download that batch and populate it. So the first thing that we can do is go ahead and click on the download template. And that's just going to download that Excel file directly to our device, as you can see is happening now. And from there, we'll enable editing and we'll start to populate this information. Now, while there are multiple columns here, multiple fields, I would like to point out that just in order for you to successfully submit the batch, in order for our utility to just digest things and actually create invoices, what I've highlighted is actually the extent of required information. And for all of those people familiar with submitting invoices in our application today, this should look really familiar to you. Invoice number and claim number, of course, are required. That assignment type and that assignment name, the things that actually comprise the invoice and get us to a dollar amount outcome, payment term and PA or attorney involvement, and adjuster's first and last name. If we all imagine that one-to-one invoice creation process working top to bottom, it's those exact same fields that we require. In this case, we're just moving left to right, with each row being considered its own invoice in the application. Of course, at any time, we can leave comments and attach additional unit of measure expenses and additional expenses as we go through the process, both things that we'll talk about as we actually populate the template. So I'm going to start with invoice number. Next claim service is 007, and I'll do 0, 8, and 9 as well. So same with claim number, I will say NCS 007 and 8. I'm also going to add a claim number, and we'll talk a little bit more about this claim number in a little bit and why it's important. I'm going to do claim number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So as we move to the right, the assignment type and the assignment name, of course, these are based off the fee schedules that have been programmed in the system already. And just like if we were to do the one-to-one invoice creation process to select the rules that are assigned to us in the application. So for example, if I select non-cat, then my assignment name column becomes available and I can select the rule associated to non-cat. You'll notice that before I make an assignment selection, it's actually blank. And that's just because, of course, our assignment type, as always, is what's driving our assignment name. So I'll do one more assignment type of, say, engineering, just as an example. And once we get to assignment name, this is really where I want to talk about the right time and potentially the not so right time. In the current state, we're really looking to solve for those flat fee styles of invoice. And what I mean by that, and of course we do account for those units of measures, but what I mean by that is those things like re-inspections and erroneous assignments and denials, and potentially things like engineering flat fees or anything along the lines of a very standard payout, not so much in relation to the estimate amount written on the claim file. So for example, if I were to use this CAT assignment type and click on the tiered rate assignment, we all know what that tiered rate assignment is. My estimate is say $1,000 to $10,000, and therefore I get a payout of X. That can work, and I do always promote that if you can use this functionality to drive an accurate outcome, then please do. Where using the batch functionality to work through tiered rate assignments can become complicated is when there's flat fees involved with those invoices. So in our current state, the batch functionality does actually not account for those flat rates. Maybe it's ladder assist or hover or administrative assistant fee or stuff, something like that. Those things are actually not captured today. And because of that, without the ability to add those additional fees, we may not be able to generate the most accurate outcome. However, in this case, my CAT tiered rate assignment actually does not have any flat fees. Not only do I have none assigned to the rule itself, but there are none on the actual assignment that I had handled as an adjuster. So I'm going to use this CAT tiered rate assignment. And what I know about this CAT rate or tiered rate assignment is that there is mileage associated to it. And of course, mileage is one of those units of measures. We all may be familiar with it to a certain extent, and let's call it 57.5 cents a mile. Something that you also may be familiar with is that language of maybe the first 50 miles are free. And that's exactly how this rule is set up. So we do have mileage, and you can see mileage is included here. And we know it's 57.5 cents based on our knowledge of the fee schedule. And we know that the first 50 units are free. Therefore, if I put in 75 units, it's going to give me a mileage outcome of those 25 units above 50 times 57.5 cents. So that's how we'll leave this one. And we could even leave that note, mileage included. For the non-CAT assignment, again, we'll go with something that's maybe that absolutely right use case, which would be those erroneous assignments, those inspection onlys, those re-inspections where regardless of our estimate amount, we know that that assignment has a flat fee generated, and we'll use this inspect only as the example here, excuse me. This last one, engineering, I will say that we'll use the standard fee, which is our only rule, of course, for engineering, and we'll go ahead and proceed. So quickly, I'm going to populate the rest of this file with our payment term, which we'll leave at 30 days. Our PA or attorney involvement, I'll leave to unknown because I'm just not sure. And our adjuster's first last names, John Smith, Jane Doe, and Sarah Johnson. Again, we can always leave comments if we know a little bit more about the rule and we know that there are units of measures involved. We can add them just like we've done with mileage here. But for now, I think this is a great first example, and we'll actually go ahead and save this file. I'm going to pull my Document Explorer over. I apologize. I believe because I'm sharing my screen. Okay, there it is. It was just hidden from me. All right, so all I'm doing off screen here while I'm working through it is, of course, just going to that file that I've created for the company or the carrier client that I'm submitting to. I've created my folder that I'm saving all of my batches in, just to make sure that if there are any issues, if there's any reason I need to go back, of course I can. So from here, I'm going to save my file. And I'm going to come back to the file. So from here, we've saved it. It's on my computer, it's on my device, and now we can go right back to the application. So before I go any further, I know some of y'all don't have mics. Do you have any questions, comments, concerns about anything we've talked through so far? All right, I'll take that as a no. I can't see chats there, so maybe helping me out with chats would be great.
Absolutely. It doesn't look like anybody has any questions yet, except for we did have one that said the PA attorney section is only none or PA involved and attorney involved. If it could be addressed as unknown option, that would be appreciated.
And that's coming from Amber. Okay. So yeah, Amber, that's something we will absolutely look at. That unknown option should be available to you. So I'll just check your configurations and make sure that is available, and you should see it here within the next few days. So I apologize for that. I'll make sure it's added for you. Thank you, Sarah. Okay. So from here, we have our payment cycle date range, and this is required information before we go ahead and upload the batch. I've seen this used two ways, and there's a way that I would suggest using it, and there may be a way that a carrier client that you're submitting this to would say, hey, Nick said one thing, we want it another way. So keep that in mind. I'm only here to offer some of the feedback that I can offer, but two ways I would suggest using the payment cycle date range. Either the date you're submitting, which I have seen before, for example, 1/14 to 1/14. What I've also seen, and what I think is much more accurate, is giving that payment cycle date range. So let's say your payment terms every 2 weeks. It's coming up tomorrow on the 15th. Why don't we say it's January 1 to the 14th, so they understand that the invoices we're submitting here today encapsulate that date range of the 1 to the 14th of January. So from here, I'm going to click Choose File. That's going to open up my Document Explorer, and I will move that off screen here for just a moment. And all I'm doing again is just, of course, going to where I've saved that file in my computer or on my device, and essentially opening it up like I normally would. So just like any Document Explorer, it will open up your Explorer. You'll go find your file. You can go ahead and double click on that file. You can see that Nick's Claim Services -VIP Insurance and Vision, which is my vendor, of course, the carrier who I'm submitting it to, the date, and the number of batches I've submitted in a day. So this is the automatically generated name for the file. Of course, you can change it to something more personal to your business, or that helps you keep track of things a bit more easily. However, we give this to you all, so it's very clear between you as the vendor and the carrier that it's coming from you, it's going to them, and this was the date, and this was how many files were submitted on that date. So now that I've filled out my template, I've given my date range, and I've chosen my file, let's go ahead and click Upload Batch. That's going to successfully upload the batch and take us to our Manage Batch Invoices tab. So we don't need to go to that tab automatically. It's going to pull us in. Once we submit a batch, it's just going to say, hey, we've noticed you've submitted a batch. Why don't we take a look at that batch? So the file name, of course, we already know that already. The date submitted is today. The number of invoices are 3. That's all information we know. Some of the most important information, or actually the two most important things, are the status of the batch and the invalid invoices in the batch. Status will automatically go to not mapped or processing, depending on the structure of your report. This one went directly to processing. The next one we submit will go through that not mapped process, and we can talk about what that means and how we can correct it and how we can get that batch to the processing status. So I should mention that the processing status, of course, means that it's working. For those of you who are not familiar, essentially every 5 minutes, a tool comes through at VIP to look for batches that have been submitted. And if it sees any, it starts to process them. So keep in mind that depending on when you submit the batch and depending on when that file or that tool ran last, it may be 30 seconds until it starts to process. It could be those whole 5 minutes. And of course, depending on how many invoices you have in the batch will dictate how long it actually takes to process. So it's going to stay in this processing status. And of course, it's not going to refresh in real time. So what I'll do is actually just go back to my dashboard. And what we'll see is NCS007 and 8 are submitted. They're on my dashboard. They weren't here before. So that leads me to believe that the batch has been processed. And for that reason, I will go back to my Manage Batch Invoices tab. And it tells me that it's not processed. And at this point, you would say, that's strange because I was on the dashboard and I saw 2 invoices. But we submitted 3 and there's 1 missing. And what it's telling us is it's not processed and there's an invalid invoice associated with the batch. Anytime you see an invalid invoice in the not processed status, I highly recommend that you click the edit option and see what that issue is. And why I emphasize that so much is that when your batch is in this not processed status, the carrier won't see that you submitted it. Until this invoice or until this batch goes to the submitted status, the carrier will not see any invoices. Even those 2 that were generated for you all that you see on your dashboard or that vendor admin would see it on their dashboard, the carrier will not see until it is marked submitted. So just keep that in mind. So when I clicked on edit, it opened up my batch invoice detail interface and I can see that these 2 went through. There were no exceptions. That's great. If you're starting to deal with 10, 20, 30 invoices, you can filter out to show exceptions. And it will, if you click search, just show you the exceptions, just show you the no exceptions, just show you the removed. So it is an easy way to bounce through and actually find that information that you're looking for. Keep that in mind. But what we know is that NCS 009, this engineering invoice, had an exception, and that exception was claim does not exist, essentially. And that's really important because we have to remember that our connectivity with your estimating platform, whether that's Exact or Symbility or FileTrack or whatever it may be, that's where we're looking to validate that this claim file exists, that the job was complete, that there was supporting information to help validate that this was a real file. And what we've done with that claim number 12345, that doesn't exist in our data set. It says, nope, that claim does not exist. We don't feel comfortable pushing it through because we can't understand where this claim number is coming from. And I have 2 options. I can edit that particular line item or I can delete it. Deleting it, I would say use that as the second option. Always edit it first because when you edit it, it will open up an interface where you're allowed to say, okay, invoice number NCS 009. Claim number 12345. It wasn't 12345, it was 12345.7, for example. In this case, I am just going to update it to NCS 009, which is a claim number that exists. And from there, I'll click update. So you'll notice that our batch starts to process again. It's going to look at that specific invoice again and just make sure that now the claim file exists. Now, if you had gotten to that point, and it's something that we'll talk about here in a moment, if you had gotten to that point and you say, oh, that claim number truly does not exist, I'm not sure why that was added. Maybe it was just a typo on my end. Like, for example, you stretched out a bit of information one row past your last claim number, it will try to read that invoice and it will say that it's missing information. So if you get to that point, and we'll use that as another example here in just a moment, you can always just remove it and it will switch to a submitted status because you've lifted any exceptions involved with the batch. Any questions thus far? And Sarah, if you could help me out with chat again, I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Nobody's putting any questions in right this moment.
Okay, very good. So let's let that one process, and let's go back to the upload batch invoice page. So I want to go through another example with you all. I'm going to download the template to my device. Of course, that's going to open up that Excel file that we're. Oh, doesn't like that I have the same file up twice. So let me retry. And here we are. So I've got my new file. Of course, I need to enable editing. And once again, I'm just going to go through very quickly and fill out some of this information that's required. And we'll pick up at 010. So we'll do another 3 invoices. Our claim numbers that match. And on this last one, NCS 013, again, I'll use that claim number that doesn't exist in our data set, and we'll show you how we can delete them. So our assignment type, I'm going to do a few non-cats. I'm going to do a cat assignment. I'm going to do an engineering. Before I submit this, I do want to just pop back into the application. We see that that third invoice was submitted while we were working. Of course, it's doing all of these things in the background, and that batch is on the submitted status. So the carrier has now received this, and they're able to push it through as paid if there are no exceptions with the invoice. So all 3 of mine are going to that submitted awaiting payment status or that pending status. That's intentional. And as we click through $500, $564.38, and $1,250 based off the rules and the fee schedules that we chose, these are our outcomes. The one that I am really interested in, however, is this $564.38. And that's because I just wanted to show you that that note from myself of mileage included is there. That fee of $14.38 for 25 miles above the 50 at 57.5 cents, is included. So I just want to let you know that if you add those units of measure, they will be included. Your notes will be included. However, if you say tried to charge a unit of measure and it doesn't exist, just another reason why you may run into that edit functionality where it says, hey, we noticed that there's an exception. You tried to attach a unit of measure where it maybe doesn't belong. Just take a look at it and remove it if you could. That's just to show you that, of course, every row that we're creating here is generating an individual invoice for the carrier to review and hopefully mark paid, or for you all to help push through to that ready for payment paid status. So I'm going to make a few selections here, just some basic flat rates. Again, just looking at that more typical use case of the flat fees. What I know about the engineering flat fee is that it has a T&E rate of, I believe, $79 an hour above and beyond the $12.50 flat fee. And I'm going to call it 2.5 hours above and beyond. I could also say, of course, T&E included. But now I want to talk about what happens when we don't have those flat fees or units of measures involved in adding an expense to the invoice, but we do actually need to attach an expense. Things like tolls, things like lodging, things like aerial reviews that aren't included actually within the fee schedule, but of course we do need to charge for. And to do that, we'll use these last 2 columns that are actually empty. And what we'll ask you to do is just add the name in the amount box of that additional expense. So they work the same way. If we're talking about amount deductions, we could type in amount deductions, and this would be its name, essentially, amount deduction name, amount deduction amount, and we could fill out that information. However, we're going to do an additional expense because it is the most common option. So additional expense name, add expense amount, And when I add that name, for example, we'll use tolls as the example. Tolls at $12.50. This one had a cancellation fee of $55. And this reinspection had a lodging fee of a night at, call it $150. And that's that. We've included these two columns, additional expense name and additional expense amount. We've added the names and we've added the amounts associated with them. So from here, this is where we're going to get into that mapping portion. It's very straightforward. And as we actually go to submit this invoice, we'll show you exactly how to do that and make sure we're all on the same page. So for payment term, today I'll select 20 days. I'll use none as my option. And John Smith is the adjuster for all four. So we filled out all of that required information. We've left a comment on one with the T&E expense, and we've added some additional expenses with names and amounts on all three invoices that are going to be processed. So once again, I'll just save as. And bear with me one more time as I go through and save this in the right location. All right, it's been saved. My payment term today is today. These are some last minute invoices that I need to get in right before the 15th. So I've filled out my dates. I'm right back here to my files. This is my most recent one, 4, and I'll upload that batch. So again, it will process it. It will take me back to the manage batch interface page, and it's going to tell me right away. Remember, we talked about that processing or not mapped. It's going to tell us that it's not mapped, and we get the option to edit the mapping. So it hasn't even looked at any of our invoices yet. All it knows is that we added something that needs to be assigned. So by clicking the edit mapping option, we're just going to have to make one distinction. And it was either around those fee deductions or amount deductions or those additional expenses. And because we did additional expenses, by clicking the add button, I can say that the first column, the field name, was the additional expense name. And I'm trying to map that with the amount, which is the additional expense amount. So once we've made the distinction of the fee name and the amount, and we map those columns, it will take us back. That batch will start to process. Our utility will start to look at it and make sure that everything makes sense. So once again, we'll just let that process and run. Since we did map the report, we do get a quick little note just saying, hey, your invoices will be created. You completed the mapping. So just be aware that you may get a message related to that. Also, before we hop over to any questions that we have, the last thing I would like to say is, our goal is not to have you living in the application at all times. We don't want you to submit it and just stay there refreshing it. Let's say you submit it right before lunch or right before a coffee break. Go ahead and take that coffee break. We'll be sure to email you once it gets to that submitted or exceptions status and just shoot you an email and say, hey, this is where the status of that batch is. Why don't you either go take a look and see what you can do to help move it forward, or, hey, it's been submitted. You're good to go. No need to go in and check on it. So just a quick note that you will get alerted once they actually process through.
Nick, while we're waiting for that to process, we do have a question.
Sure.
Someone asked that their batch template they use looks different for an engineering firm. Will they be using the template you're using now going forward?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. So always keep in mind that number one, of course, this is just a staging environment just for the purposes of our demo. And the batch template I'm using is specific to the rules I have set up for this company, being the vendor and the carrier relationship. So your template all of your templates, anyone at a company that's different from one another will have a template based schedules involved, based off those units of measures, based off the rules. I see non-cat, cat, engineering, and T&E. You may see universal fee schedule and hurricane, or type A and type B. Your units of measure instead of mileage could say miles. It just purely depends on how things are set up in the application itself. So I hope that answers your question.
Yes, she said she's got it.
Fantastic. And I would say sometimes, depending on the complexity of the fee schedule, I'm very selective, of course, making this fee schedule to make sure we're all on a very clear and level playing field. So my fee schedule and my batch interface or template, because of that, is very simplistic. Some other fee schedules are very comprehensive. They cover multiple different styles or lines of business. And because of that, units of measures vary, and you can have a very long list of units of measures associated with your actual report. So just keep in mind that those things are always unique based on those selections that we make. Okay, so we see NC010, and I would assume that means it started to process, and I'm going to go look back, and it tells me that there are 3 invalid invoices. So we got the one to process. That's great. It's telling us that there are 3 invalid. So of course, in this case, we'll click edit and we'll take a look at what those are. I thought I copied them over, but maybe I did not. So I'll do none for the first. I will do public adjuster for the second, although it is the same adjuster. And then the third one, it did give me that, and I apologize, I thought I had copied those over. So it did tell me that the PA or attorney involvement is required. It also told me that that claim does not exist. So in this case, I look at the claim 234567. No, that's not a real claim. I don't have a replacement claim number for that. And for that reason, I'm just going to go ahead and remove it from the batch altogether. It's going to ask me, are you sure you want to remove it? We'll click yes. That exception's been lifted. Of course, we put in the PA or attorney involvement for the other 2, which now have no exceptions. This last one's been removed and it's submitted. So again, we'll have those 3 invoices that pass through actually in the application. And again, just to show you that as we scroll down, tolls at $12.50 were included on the invoice total based on those additional expense columns that we added in math. Any questions there about the mapping, about additional expenses, about removing a particular invoice from a batch?
Looks like we may be all good.
Okay, so really quick, I am going to move over now, and of course we submitted those invoices to a carrier. Believe it or not, I'm also the administrator over here at the carrier, and this is my view. And I want to show you all this because it's important that we understand how things move. It's important to understand not only your responsibilities, but the carrier's responsibilities so that you can help mitigate those things on both ends, right? It's a back and forth. This is a relationship between a carrier and a vendor. And sometimes those responsibilities fall on the carrier to get things right or correct them. And sometimes it falls on the carrier to make sure those things that are not right are handled. And we'll notice 4 batches, those same 4 batches that if I went to over here, I submitted 4 batches. They're all in the submitted state. And that's great because we know once they get to submitted, then the carrier has received them. We see 2 of the batches in the ready for payment status. We see 2 of the batches in the pending status. That is because, and I'm going to actually, let's talk about this real quick. So just because a batch is submitted does not necessarily mean your job as the vendor is completed. All that means is that the carrier has received it. But until all of those invoices are in the ready for payment status, or until all of the exception invoices are removed, those pending or rejected invoices are removed from the batch won't be able to get paid. And that's really important because one of the things we most commonly get communications on is, hey, Nick, I'm over here at the carrier level. I'm trying to make a payment, but that option is grayed out. And that's just because the status is pending. Where these statuses are ready for payment, we can mark them paid. And of course, you all may be familiar with this. Check number, we'll use today's date. The check date is, of course, today. And the amount is $27.74.38. One of those future updates that we're talking about is automatically including check amount because if you're making that full payment, if you're paying the batch, we assume that your check amount is for the whole amount. Now, we're not going to make that concrete. We'll populate that amount for you. If you need to change it, of course, change it. But sometimes the interface could potentially cover up that amount. You don't remember that amount all the time. So we will populate that for you in future releases as we work to implement some new things here. So once I mark it as paid, those invoices are paid, goes to the batch invoices that have been paid. And if I go back to my dashboard and I look at that batch, we now see that that one invoice that made it through has been marked. So just keep in mind that, again, a change on this side of things, a payment here equals a payment on the vendor side, of course. So I do want to update a few statuses real quick, just so we can see on the carrier side potentially what it looks like when 2 invoices are ready for payment and 1 is still in a pending state. So we'll mark 11 and 12 as ready for payment, and we'll leave 10 as a pending invoice. So again, along that same line, that one of the most common questions is, hey, I see the invoices, they came over in the batch, however, I can't pay them. And something that's also important for everybody to know is that a payment can't be made on, when a payment is, let me take that back. A batch can't be paid on the individual level. In our application, a batch moves as a batch, meaning that these 3 invoices can't be paid on a separate note. Essentially, the batch has to be paid. And in order for that to happen, again, we're still in that pending status. If I click on this number 3, it's going to open up what invoices fall within that batch. Again, another enhancement that we're looking to bring out in a future release is actually the ability to filter out by pending or rejected. Sometimes when we have hundreds of invoices and most of them are in a ready for payment status, going through page by page is by far not ideal. So what we want to do is be able to filter by pending or rejected versus ready for payment. So that way we're really focusing on what we need to edit. Now, of course, as the carrier, I could click on this and I could view it and I could review it and mark it ready for payment. However, maybe it's the payment term and we need to get that check out and we want to pay the vendor. However, there's a few invoices, or in this case, that one invoice that's holding us up. We want to get that payment out. It's been the 2-week payment term and we don't have time to get this back over to the client to get them to edit the invoice and get it back in that ready for payment status. By clicking remove, it's going to ask if we're sure, of course. And by clicking yes, it's going to remove that batch, change the number, change the invoice total. And now we're back into that ready for payment status where we could then check number, check date, and check amount and mark them as paid. Again, get them off our not paid list, get them on our paid list. When we go back to the dashboard, we see 1 and 2 is paid. So just want to show you again, just how that process is handled from the carrier side. And again, some of those functionalities that we're going to be bringing to the payment and management side of the batch payment interfaces. Any questions on that from the carrier or vendor end? I typically am a firm believer that silence is a good thing. But again, please feel free if you have any questions. There's no such thing as a bad question here. We want to make sure that you all understand things as thoroughly as possible. So if there are any questions, just please either shoot them over to the comments and Sarah can help me out there or shout them out. All good, Sarah?
Yes, all good.
Okay. All right. So one last thing I want to talk about should just take a couple minutes. There's a few functionalities that we want to bring to the batch functionality, some of which you've already heard me talk about, and they're more so geared towards the carrier side. This is more in relation to the vendor end now. Some of those functionalities that we plan on bringing to the batch functionality are things like including those flat fees, the ability to essentially just say yes or no, a flat fee is here and this is what the flat fee is. And that way we can ensure that we're getting to the most accurate outcome for the invoice, and also hopefully allowing you to use that batch functionality, excuse me, to the furthest extent. Again, right now we're limited to that additional expense unit of measure style of getting additional dollars onto the invoice. But we do want to bring in those flat fees so that you all have the 100% use case and can make sure you're driving the most accurate outcome. Another thing that we're looking to bring on as well, and this is some feedback that we've gotten as time has progressed, is the ability to actually select the estimate associated with the claim file. And that's another great reason why the tiered rate structures are sometimes not the most ideal, because there can be multiple estimates against a claim file. The question always comes into play, which estimate amount is it choosing? And that is always the one that we've most recently received, which can be incorrect. That's a possibility. And that's why we really want to focus on those things that are regardless of estimate amount, that just allow us to get that flat fee based off the services rendered out in the field or at your desk or what have you. So just keep in mind that just like anything at VIP, we always strive to be innovative and bring more functionality and better functionality to you all as our clients. So what I always implore is if you experience things like that, reach out to us, reach out to account management, reach out to sales, and try to get those things out there, because the chances are that we're listening and that we're reactive and that we will eventually get to implement those things and help you all have a smoother process within our application. So again, just a few things regarding the future state that we're coming out with. Just keep a lookout for those things as on LinkedIn. Keep a lookout for those things as account management and sales potentially bring up conversations on these types of functionalities. But if there are no questions, if there are no concerns, that's really all I have from my end. I really do appreciate you all listening to me babble to myself about batch functionality in their application. Sarah, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Nico. If no one else has any other questions, and please, we welcome them if you have any. I would like to invite all of you in February, and we'll be sending an invitation out. We are going to be doing a webinar on Envision. I know some of you are currently using VIP, and we want to show you the benefits of an Envision subscription and what it would empower you to be able to do, the time and the expense that it would save you. If you have any questions about that, feel free to email me. I think everyone has my email address. And if there's nothing else, we will wrap it up. I hope you all have a wonderful afternoon and a great upcoming weekend.